The sun always rose gently over our land, as if it were careful not to wake something fragile. Light spilled across the prairie in long golden ribbons, catching on the barbed wire fences, resting soft against the backs of grazing cattle. Dust drifted in the early morning like breath from a sleeping giant. The world felt wide and forgiving at that hour. Even the wind seemed to move slower, as if it respected the silence. That was when my father began his first walk. Every morning at dawn, before the coffee had finished blooming in the pot, before the rooster found his courage, he would take the same path. Hat low, boots steady, a bundle wrapped in cloth tucked beneath his arm. 3 times a day. Dawn, noon, dusk. The townsfolk counted. They always counted. They said no man walks that far, that often, without something to hide. From the porch of the mercantile, old Mr. Halvorson would lean against the wooden post and squint toward our property as if distance itself were suspicious. Women sweeping their stoops would pause mid-motion when his silhouette appeared against the horizon. Even the children, barefoot and sunbrowned, learned early to whisper when he passed. There goes the rancher. There goes the man who kneels in the dirt. There goes the one who buries things. I learned to walk with my eyes lowered. They never said the words loud enough for him to hear, but they said them loud enough for me. I was his daughter, though sometimes the town made me feel more like his shadow. Quiet, watchful, the kind of girl people assume is listening to secrets when she's only listening to the wind. They call me strange in that careful way people do when they think they're being kind. She's soft, they'd say. She's delicate. Poor thing, raised alone with that man. As if solitude were a disease you could catch by blood. The truth is, I had never seen my father angry. Never seen him raise his voice or his hand. He moved through life the way water moves around stone, steady, patient, shaping things quietly without anyone noticing. But patience unsettles those who prefer noise. At noon, he would walk again. The heat would press against the earth like a heavy palm. Cicadas would hum their relentless hymn. Most men in town would be resting in shade or nursing a tin cup of something stronger than water. Not my father. He would lift the same cloth bundle, adjust his hat, and walk the long stretch of land toward the far boundary where the grass grew uneven and the soil darkened. From a distance, it looked like he knelt. From farther away, it looked like he prayed. But rumor has a way of turning prayer into something darker. I used to stand at the kitchen window and watch his outline bend against the horizon. I told myself I was only making sure he did not fall, that I was only measuring the distance of him. But if I am honest, there is a splinter of fear tucked beneath my ribs. What was he doing out there? Why 3 times a day? Why alone? The first man who ever made me question my loyalty wore polished boots and a smile too quick to trust. Eli Morgan had arrived in town with a laugh that carried. He worked part-time at the livery, part-time wherever charm could buy him bread. His hair caught the sunlight in a way that made the younger girls straighten their dresses. He liked to walk beside me when I carried feed sacks from the general store. "You deserve better than whispers," he once said, nudging a stone with his boot. "A girl like you shouldn't be tied to a man folks can't figure out." I asked him what there was to figure. He shrugged, grin thinning. "A man who hides things in the ground isn't planting flowers." The sentence settled between us like dust. I wanted to defend my father. I wanted to say that I had never seen blood on his hands, only soil. But doubt is a quiet creature. Once it finds a crack, it makes itself comfortable. That evening, I watched my father closer than I ever had. The sky had turned copper, the kind of color that makes you believe the world is holding its breath. He carried the bundle again. The cloth looked heavier somehow, sagging at the corners. I followed, not close enough for him to hear my steps, not brave enough to walk beside him, just far enough to see. The land thinned near the boundary line. Grass gave way to open earth. The wind lost its voice there, as if secrets preferred stillness. He knelt, slowly, carefully. He unwrapped the bundle, but from where I stood, I could not see what lay inside. His back shielded it from me. His shoulders curved inward, protective, reverent. His hands moved in the soil, digging, placing, covering. He stayed there longer than usual that evening. When he rose, he pressed his palm flat against the earth, lingering. Not the way a guilty man checks his work. More like the way someone says goodbye without words. A shiver slipped through me. I stepped backward before he could turn. By the time he returned home, I was seated at the table, pretending to mend a tear in my sleeve. He nodded once at me, that familiar, gentle acknowledgement. No questions, no explanations. Supper passed in near silence. The lantern light flickered soft against his weathered face. There were lines around his eyes I had not noticed before. Lines carved not by anger, but by endurance. After dishes were washed and the night wrapped itself around the house, I heard hoofbeats in the distance. Low voices, the kind of voices that do not belong to friendly visits. Through the thin curtain, I saw Sheriff Tompkins dismount near our gate. 2 other men lingered behind him, hats pulled low. My father did not rush. He stepped onto the porch as though he had expected them. "Evening, Sheriff," he said calmly. Tompkins cleared his throat. "We've had concerns," he began. "Folks talking." "Folks always talk," my father replied. The sheriff shifted, uncomfortable. "They say you've been burying something out there. 3 times a day. That's a mighty lot of digging for a man with nothing to hide." The wind picked up just then, tugging at the edges of coats and curtains alike. I felt the weight of every rumor pressing against our porch boards. My father's voice remained steady. "A man tends what's his." That was all he offered. No defense, no anger, just that. The sheriff studied him, searching for cracks in composure. Finding none, he finally nodded. "We'll be keeping an eye on things." "You're welcome to," my father answered. The men mounted their horses and rode back toward town, dust trailing behind them like unfinished thoughts. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of my father's breathing in the next room. I realized something then. The town believed they were watching him, but they had never truly seen him, and neither had I. Outside, the land stretched wide and patient beneath the moon. Somewhere beyond the fence line, freshly turned earth cooled in the dark. And at dawn, I knew he would walk again. After that night, the air around our ranch changed. It did not grow louder. It grew thinner, like a place where too many questions have been asked and none answered. In town, doors no longer swung open when I approached. Conversations did not stop abruptly. They slowed instead, softened into careful tones that pretended not to be about me. Pity is heavier than accusation. It drapes itself across your shoulders and calls it kindness. At the general store, Mrs. Halvorson counted my coins twice before sliding flour across the counter. Not suspicion exactly, just distance. I began sitting at the far end of the church pew. The hymns sounded different from there. Lonelier. Even the organ felt hesitant, as if unsure which notes were safe. And every day, without fail, my father walked. Dawn, noon, dusk, the cloth bundle under his arm, his shoulders slightly more curved than before. I watched the way his steps had slowed. Not weak, but careful, as if each footfall carried memory. Eli Morgan stopped walking beside me. It happened quietly like most endings do. One afternoon near the water trough, he tipped his hat in greeting but did not fall in a step. His smile was polite now, not bright. "People are watching," he said, not unkindly. "It's best I don't complicate things." Complicate, as though affection were a stain, as though loyalty were something to be washed off in town water. I nodded, because dignity sometimes requires silence. That was the last day he sought me out. The next time I saw him, he was laughing beside a girl whose father owned 3 good horses and no rumors. I felt something inside me fold neatly away. Not heartbreak, just clarity. The land does not grieve for what was never rooted. It was during one of those quieter afternoons that I first noticed Daniel Hayes. He had come to town months before, though I could not recall anyone announcing his arrival. He worked where work needed hands, repairing fences, mending wagon wheels, shaping wood into things that lasted. He spoke little, but he listened fully. The first time he addressed me, it was not with charm. It was with simple observation. "You carry more than those sacks weigh," he said gently as I struggled with feed near the barn. I blinked, unsure how to answer. He did not elaborate. He did not pry. He simply lifted the heavier sack from my arms and walked beside me without expectation. There are people who enter your life like a storm, And there are people who arrive like shade. Daniel was shade. Over the next weeks, our exchanges were small and ordinary. A bucket passed from hand to hand. A fence post steadied. A nod shared across distance. He never asked about my father. He never mentioned the whispers. Once, while repairing a broken hinge near our property line, he glanced toward the far boundary where my father knelt in the late afternoon sun. Hard thing, being misunderstood, he said softly. I felt my breath catch. What makes you think he is misunderstood? Daniel adjusted the hinge, testing its swing. A man who keeps showing up for something every day isn't hiding. He's tending. The word lingered between us. Tending. Not burying. Not concealing. Tending. That night, I repeated the word in my mind like a prayer. Tending. As autumn leaned closer, my father's cough began. It started small. A clearing of the throat that stretched too long. A pause before speech. By noon, the sun would press hard against his back, and I could see the strain in the set of his jaw. Yet still he walked. 3 times a day. The bundle seemed lighter now. Or perhaps he carried it differently. One evening, I stepped onto the porch before he could leave. Let me go for you, I said quietly. Just once. He regarded me for a long moment. A promise is not something you hand to another, child. His voice held no sharpness. Only certainty. What promise? He gave the smallest smile. One you will understand when it is time. Then he walked. I stood there until the dust swallowed him. Daniel noticed the cough before anyone else dared to speak of it. While helping stack hay near the barn, he paused as my father turned away to hide another spell of breathlessness. He's pushing himself, Daniel murmured. He always does, I replied. Daniel wiped his hands on his trousers, thoughtful. Some men push because they are running from something. Others push because they are building something. Which do you think he is? He met my eyes then. You already know. It unsettled me. How steady he was. How certain. That night, lantern light flickered across our kitchen walls, and my father sat longer than usual before touching his supper. You're tired, I said. He shook his head. Just remembering. Remembering what? He looked toward the window, where darkness rested against the glass. How barren this land once was. I had never known it barren. In my lifetime, grass rolled in waves and cattle grazed steady. But something in his tone carried older seasons. The following Sunday, the sheriff returned. This time he did not come alone. 3 men stood behind him, faces firm with borrowed courage. We've decided, Tompkins announced, removing his hat, that for everyone's peace of mind, we'll take a look out there. A look. The word felt invasive. My father did not rise from his chair immediately. He finished the sip of water in his cup before setting it down. You're welcome to walk my land, he said calmly. I have nothing to keep from you. The men exchanged glances. Tomorrow at dawn, the sheriff said, we'll dig where you kneel. Silence settled like dust. I stepped forward without thinking. You have no right. Tompkins' eyes softened briefly. Miss, when rumors spread this far, rights bend under worry. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. Let them come. His palm was warm, steady. After they left, the house felt smaller. I turned to him, frustration burning low in my chest. Why won't you tell them? Why won't you tell me? He studied my face as if memorizing it. Because understanding given too early feels like charity. And I would rather you see it for yourself. The words were gentle, but they did not ease me. That night, sleep did not come easily. Outside, the wind moved restless across the fields. Somewhere beyond the fence line, the earth held its quiet secret. At dawn, the town would come with shovels. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was not afraid of what lay beneath the soil. I was afraid of what would happen if the world discovered it had been wrong. Dawn arrived pale and uncertain, the kind of morning that feels as though the sky itself is holding its breath. A thin mist hovered over the prairie, soft as gauze. Hoofbeats broke the quiet first, then low voices, then the scrape of metal against wagon wood. I stood beside my father at the edge of our porch as the sheriff and half the town gathered near the far boundary of our land. No one looked at me directly. They looked at the soil, at the place where my father knelt 3 times a day. Daniel stood a few steps behind us, hat in hand, his presence steady as fence posts sunk deep in earth. He did not crowd. He did not speak. He was simply there. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We'll start here." My father nodded once. The men walked toward the patch of darker soil. The wind shifted slightly, brushing against my skirt as if urging me to stay strong. Shovels pierced the ground. The first thrust sounded louder than it should have. Metal striking earth. A dull, final noise that made several women flinch. I did not. If something terrible lay beneath that soil, I wanted to see it. The digging continued. Soil lifted, turned, lifted again. A few feet down, one of the men paused. "There's wood," he muttered. A ripple moved through the crowd. "Wood." Someone gasped. The sheriff knelt and brushed dirt aside with his gloved hands. Slowly, carefully, as though afraid of confirming his own suspicions, a small wooden marker emerged. Simple, hand-carved, weathered. Not a coffin, not a box, just a narrow plank standing upright. He dug further. Beneath the plank, wrapped gently in burlap, lay something rounded, firm, alive with quiet potential. The sheriff tore the burlap open. Roots, tender roots, pale and fragile, cradled in dark soil. A sapling. For a long moment, no one spoke. The men stared down at the small tree as though it had just confessed a secret on behalf of the earth. My father stepped forward then, his boots slow but certain. "Be careful with the roots," he said softly. "They bruise easy." The words did not sound offensive. They sounded protective. The sheriff looked up, confusion overtaking suspicion. "You've been planting." My father crouched beside the hole, brushing soil between his fingers. 20 years ago, he began, his voice low but clear enough to carry. A fire came through this region, burned half the county flat. You remember. Some nodded, some did not. But the older men shifted uneasily. Fields turned to ash. Wind carried embers for miles. Took years for the grass to return. He looked out over the horizon, where the prairie now rolled thick and golden. What most folks don't remember is how close it came to the town. Silence deepened. There was nothing between those flames and your homes, he continued. No trees, no moisture barrier, just dry land waiting its turn. He rested his palm gently against the sapling's thin trunk. So I started planting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The sheriff straightened slowly. 3 times a day, morning to water, noon to check the soil, evening to brace them against wind. Each one spaced careful. Each one planted where it might hold back something worse. His cough surfaced briefly, but he waved it away. Trees grow slow, slower when planted without praise. Someone stepped forward, incredulous. Why not tell anyone? My father's eyes softened. Because good things grow better without applause. The sentence settled over us like morning light. Men who had come prepared for horror now stood facing hope. More holes were opened, more markers uncovered. Each one cradled a sapling. Some are older now, their roots deeper, their trunks thicker. A quiet orchard had been forming along the edge of our land, unseen by those who never walked far enough to look closely. Daniel moved beside me, his voice barely above breath. He was tending. I felt my throat tighten. All this time, I had feared graves. I had feared shame. But my father had been planning a future. The sheriff removed his hat fully now, holding it against his chest. "Rancher," he began, struggling for the right word. "I reckon we misjudged." My father did not smile in triumph. He simply nodded. "The land doesn't mind being doubted," he said. "It just keeps growing." The first man, Eli, stood near the back of the crowd. His face had lost its easy confidence. He stared at the saplings as though they had undone something inside him. He caught my eye briefly. There was apology there, but it came too late. The crowd began dispersing slowly. No cheers, no dramatic apologies, just a heavy quiet filled with realization, the kind of quiet that follows truth. As the last of them walked back toward town, Daniel remained. He stepped into the shallow hole and carefully adjusted the sapling's position, pressing soil gently around its roots. "May I?" he asked my father. My father studied him for a moment, then nodded. They worked side by side, restoring the earth that had been disturbed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not relief exactly, recognition. When the hole was filled and the soil smooth, my father stood slowly. His balance wavered. I reached for him instinctively. His weight leaned into me heavier than I had ever felt before. "You see now," he murmured. "Yes," I whispered. "I see." He looked toward the line of saplings stretching along the boundary. Dozens of them, some still small, some already reaching upward with quiet courage. "I couldn't save the fire back then," he said, "but I could make sure the next one met resistance." His cough returned, harsher this time. Daniel stepped closer, concern shadowing his features. "You've given enough for today, sir." My father offered him a thin smile. A man gives until he can't. The wind moved through the young trees then, brushing their leaves together in a sound almost like applause. But there was no audience left to hear it. Only us, father and daughter, and a man who had chosen to stand beside us without needing spectacle. As we walked back toward the house, my father's steps slowed again, his breathing shallow. "You should rest," I said softly. He looked out across the land once more. "It will hold now." The words felt larger than the morning. As we reached the porch, his grip tightened briefly on my hand. "If they needed a villain," he said quietly, "I could carry that weight. It's lighter than regret." Tears blur my vision. "You were never a villain." He squeezed my fingers gently. "That depends on who's telling the story." Inside the house, the light had shifted. Warmer now, almost golden. He lowered himself into his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones like winter. Outside, along the boundary line, the orchard stood in patient rows, roots deepening, leaves trembling softly in the breeze. And for the first time, the land did not feel watched. It felt understood. Yet as I knelt beside my father and listened to the uneven rhythm of his breath, I knew something else too. The trees had grown strong, but the man who planted them was beginning to fade. And sometimes, just when the truth blooms brightest, the body that carried it grows tired. The days after the digging felt softer. Not louder, not celebratory, just softer. Men tipped their hats when passing our gate now. Women brought jars of preserves they claimed were extra. Even the church pew did not feel as distant beneath me. But my father did not walk as far anymore. At dawn, he would rise out of habit, boots searching for the floor before his strength could catch up. I would be there before him. "You'll wake the trees if you keep rising so early," I teased once, trying to hide the tremble in my voice. He smiled faintly. "Trees don't mind being woken. Only people do." Still, his cough lingered. His hands, once steady as fence posts, now trembled slightly when tying knots. One evening, as the sky poured gold across the plains, he stood from his chair with quiet determination. "Help me to the boundary," he said. It was not a request. Daniel was there before I could call him. He took my father's other side without speaking. Together, we walked the familiar path. The orchard stretched before us now, no longer hidden. Young trunks lined the edge of the land like silent guardians. Their leaves shimmered in the low light. My father paused beside the first tree he had planted years ago. Its trunk was thicker than my wrist now. Its branches reached outward as if gathering the wind. He pressed his palm against the bark. "You've done well," he murmured, as though speaking to an old friend. The air felt heavy that evening. Not oppressive, just watchful. In the distance, beyond the hills, a faint gray ribbon curled into the sky. Daniel noticed it first. "Smoke." The word fell between us like a stone. The wind shifted, and in that shift, something old stirred inside my father's eyes. The kind of knowing that comes from surviving once before. Within an hour, riders were crossing the plains at full speed. The fire had started west of Miller's Creek. Dry brush, strong winds, moving fast. Panic travels quicker than flame. From our boundary, we could see it now, a dark swell rolling low across the horizon, devouring grass in its path. The sky bruised orange above it. The town lay directly in its line. Men shouted in the distance. Buckets were gathered, wagons loaded, livestock driven frantic and wide-eyed. Daniel turned to my father. "We need to get you back inside." But my father did not move. He watched the orchard, watched the rows he had planted with aching hands and quiet resolve. The fire reached the outer fields just as the sun dipped below the earth. Flames moved like hunger given legs. They devoured dry brush first, leaping and cracking, greedy and bright. The wind carried sparks forward, searching for new fuel. Then the fire met the first line of trees. The orchard did not roar. It resisted. Moist soil, carefully tended for years, slowed the advance. Green leaves held dampness within them. Spaced rows interrupted the wind's full force. The flames faltered. They climbed partway up the trunks, but found no easy path forward. Smoke thickened, swirling through branches. Sparks died where soil remained cool. The fire pushed again and again, but the orchard stood like a quiet wall. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Behind us, the town braced for impact that never fully came. The blaze thinned as it met resistance. Without open grass to feed it, without unbroken wind to carry it, the fire weakened. By midnight, what had begun as a devouring beast had shrunk to scattered embers. Men who had prepared to lose everything now stood staring at the line of trees that separated ash from safety. The sheriff approached us slowly, hat clutched tight in his hands. If those trees hadn't been there, he began, his voice rough. My father did not answer. He simply leaned more heavily against my arm. The region had been spared, not by heroics shouted from rooftops, but by years of quiet tending. Word traveled faster than smoke the next morning. People walked the boundary line in disbelief. They touched the trunks gently, as if greeting protectors they had never thanked. Eli stood among them, silent. Daniel remained beside me. You were right, I said softly. He glanced at me. About what? About tending. He offered the smallest smile. Some things grow stronger when doubted. My father did not leave his chair much after that night. The effort of standing against memory and flame had taken what little strength he had left. Weeks passed in gentler rhythm. The orchard continued to stretch upward, leaves bright against recovering skies. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window in thin golden threads, my father beckoned me closer. I knelt beside him. You'll keep walking, he said, 3 times a day. Not because of fear, because of care. Tears blurred my sight. I will. He rested his hand against mine, lighter now. Fragile. I never needed them to understand, he whispered. I only needed the trees to grow. His breathing slowed that evening. Outside, wind moved softly through the orchard, leaves brushing together in a hush that sounded almost like gratitude. He passed as the sun dipped low. Quietly, the way he had lived. The town gathered days later beneath the shade of the very trees they once doubted. No grand speeches were made, just simple words. Respect, regret, gratitude. The sheriff cleared his throat and announced that the boundary would carry my father's name from that day forward. Not because he asked for it, but because they finally saw. Seasons shifted. Spring came gentle and green. I walk the orchard 3 times a day now. Dawn, noon, dusk. Daniel walks beside me most evenings. Not to lead, not to rescue, just to share the path. The land no longer feels burdened by suspicion. It feels rooted in truth. Sometimes I pause beside the first tree my father planted. Its branches stretch wide now, casting shade enough for 2 or 3. And I think about how quickly we judge what we do not understand. How easily we mistake quiet devotion for darkness. If you're listening to this story tonight, wherever you may be, I hope you remember something simple. The ones who move differently are not always hiding. Sometimes they are planting forests you will one day depend upon. Before you decide who someone is, walk a little closer. Look beneath the surface. You may find roots instead of graves. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone who kept tending even when the world misunderstood, take a moment. Like this story, share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because out here on the wide, patient land, we are all growing something. The question is not whether the world notices. The question is whether we keep tending anyway.